This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the August 12th edition of the DRF Players Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale, back with you at the Little House by the East Side Rec. And I'm joined today not by the usual crew, but by one of the usual crew, and that's at DRF Formulator himself, Mike Hogan. Mike, how are things going down there in the city?
Well, I would imagine from a heat standpoint, it's similar to what you're dealing with up there in the middle of the state, but it's a little brutal. I'll be honest.
It's disgusting. I mean, it was like being enveloped by heat and wet yesterday. The most unpleasant day I can remember in the history of my 20 years coming to Saratoga. I think you can argue it was more unpleasant than the day they canceled almost 10 years ago just because of the humidity. I'm not saying it wasn't safe for the equines. I don't think that was the issue. I do think temperature-wise it was cooler than them, but just somehow the way the air was sitting, it was not good. But it didn't really bother me because I was so buoyed from Wednesday night's dinner at Salt and Char where Jonathan Kinchin finally paid off his debt to me and Brent Sumja. And you know what? We invited a few other friends along. We had Duke Matisse sitting in Mike Hogan's seat. So we did get you vicariously, Mike, involved in the dinner. And we left no stone unturned. Let me tell you, we ordered the special bread and butter plate. We had one of those seafood towers about 3 feet high in the middle of the table. And Sumja and I just kept egging each other on. You know, why get a 10-year-old Bordeaux when you can get a 15-year-old Bordeaux? Why get an 8-year-old port when you can get a 20-year-old port? And in the end, I'd say we extracted pretty good value from Kinchin's bet. And he even admitted halfway through that he didn't really think it was fair and that he should have been allowed off the hook because Cupid didn't make the starting gate. And I told him in no uncertain terms, Jonathan, you had the chance to say the words, non-runner, no bet. You did not say those words, and thus the 35-ounce porterhouse, dry-aged 21 days, sitting in front of me and Brent Sumja the other night. It was pretty fun.
Gee, my takeaway from that is Duke Matisse owes me dinner.
I love Duke. Good luck getting it out of him. But Jonathan had done very well that day. He did well on the first day of the Saratoga tournament. We'll wait till he's back on to talk about his strategy. I loved what he did. It was a very interesting approach. I'm not joking when I say I think he went all in about 5 times during the day, just taking his whole bankroll and trying to Dutch either win contenders or exactas. A very clever strategy that fell down a little bit late in the contest when, because of all the late money being bet within the context of the contest itself, a lot of his numbers went down. For example, when you're doing that kind of strategy, there's just an unbelievable difference even between a $33 exacta and a $27 exacta. And if your numbers get off, you can wind up getting basically 1 to 10 on your money, which happened to him at least one key juncture. And I also know, like, personally, if I were going to go all in the last leg of a contest and hit the race pretty good, I'd be a little disappointed if I didn't win. He didn't win. He did end up, I think, 6th. He walked away with a nice payday. He ran that bankroll up, and he walked with about $5,000 in cash, I think. There's an article of mine up on the DRF site now if you want to read it. The story of the day, though, was not Jonathan Kinchin on day one. The story of the day was Mark D'Amato, a paper mill worker from Green Bay, Wisconsin. First day ever at Saratoga. Very unique approach. D'Amato was playing cold trifectas. He hit one in the very first race at Delaware. Delaware was the second contest track on Wednesday. He hit a $60 cold try to get himself going. Then he slumped. I think it was the next 9 wagers, didn't hit anything. His son Michael was there to keep his spirits up, never lost faith, went back in the last race at Saratoga with a $100 cold try, ends up running up the score. He was just thrilled. He's played in contests for a number of years, but hadn't gotten a win. Ended up getting the business done at Saratoga. Also really fun. Friend of the podcast, Michael Baychok, the 2012 NHC winner, the $1 Million Man, got second. He was hanging out with a group of his friends. They just referred to themselves as the boys from Baton Rouge. I think they were the only ones comfortable in the humidity. and they were whooping and hollering when Bachok's name got posted second. He'll be heading back to the NHC, one of several players who will have an opportunity to become the first ever two-time NHC champion at the NHC in January.
It's awesome. Well, it sounds like on day 2, we had a lot of success from some recent podcast guests, right? Some
Absolutely.
friends of the podcast. And boy, it sounds like if you're not listening to the people that we bring on this show, they ran one too. Couple recent guests we've had in the last couple of weeks, right?
Not just recent guests, but regular guests and guys who I have a history with too. When I started covering contests, there were a few people I reached out to who not only gave me great interviews for my book, The Winning Contest Player. This was before there was a DRF tournament blog, essentially. Before we were reporting on tournament news, there was the idea of this book. That Mandy Menger and Stephen Chris called me one day and pitched the idea of this book. And I knew right away, I loved the idea, but I was operating at a disadvantage. And I needed to find a way to get smart quick about the handicapping contest world. And 2 of the first players I interviewed were Scott Carson, who had this website called Public Handicapper and was very active on a number of message boards and came highly recommended to me from Maury Wolf, who I'd interviewed before and is a friend and a pro player who was once active in tournaments. And then very quickly thereafter, I'm trying to remember who made the first introduction, there was Paul Sherman. And both of these guys not only gave me great interviews, but gave me all these other names of people to talk to and were just a huge help. And along the way have introduced me to people like Chris Larmy and Bill Sherman, obviously, Mitch Schumann. The list goes, I could go on and on the rest of the show with all the contest players these guys have introduced me to. So how amazing was it to see these guys who I featured in this book, who I've been covering for years, Muggs in particular, a very big Paul Sherman fan, to be able to see them have success at Saratoga. It was kind of an interesting dynamic, too, because both of these guys, as great players as they are very well known for success in the old NYRA format, but not winning. Paul Sherman had 4 seconds heading in NYRA contests. Scott had at least 2 and maybe a couple of other top 5 finishes. So these guys were both super deserving of getting a win. Obviously, only one of them could get it. It ended up being Carson, who crushed this exacta saver that he played. Ended up with a $500 exacta in the last race at Saratoga to finally get himself a win. I've never seen him like that. I was standing next to him. I rooted next to him during the race. And it was a little confusing because he was rooting so hard for C's, the 10, who was his key horse, that when they hit the wire, he disappeared like a superhero in a comic book flash. And I didn't understand because it sure seemed to me like the 10 got beat. Well, what happened is he put in all these plays keying C's, and then at the last minute said to himself, what if C's doesn't win? And decided to play, essentially as a saver, all the money he had left on his bankroll, thus the $500 straight, basically saver exacta that ended up coming back some ungodly amount of money, $7,500 or something. And that's notwithstanding the $25 in cash he gets, the Breeders' Cup betting challenge seed, the NHC seed. Carson, one of the good guys in the tournament world. He's been on this show a number of times. I think we have to have both of those guys back on Tuesday. What do you think, Mike?
I love it, yeah, because not only are they both fantastic handicappers, they're both really good guys. I mean, I've met Scott a bunch of times. Scott's in here every now and then at the DRF offices. Fantastic guy. Never met Paul in person, but whenever I've talked to him, especially on the podcast, just seems like a really nice guy. So, they're both the kind of guys that you would root for. So I'm glad that they had fantastic success. And hey, it sounds like they're both ones that you have to include in your NYRA live money tournament exacta, right?
Absolutely. They have great form there. The concept of reflected glory comes to mind, and that's the idea that other people have achievements, but they make you just feel proud and look good. For me, that's the case, seeing those guys in the NYRA live money exacta. Mm-hmm. That's for sure. Paul, one of these days, he's going to get the win in the NYRA event. It's definitely becoming a thing. I think the first day I met him actually in person was, gosh, going on 5 years ago now, in that exact same room in the upper carousel at Saratoga when he picked some bomb at Arlington. A little bit of a different dynamic. I think that day he was pretty happy to get up into second. This day, while he didn't say anything, I mean, just if it's me, you finish second in a 200-runner event that you've already run second in 4 times, essentially. Maybe you want a little more, because he isn't even eligible for the NHC seat because he was already double qualified. So for him, it's just the cash, and the BCBC only went to the top spot. Actually, that was a funny story as well. That means the NHC seat slides to another familiar contest player we've never had on the pod, but I've interviewed a bunch of times, so we got to get on here eventually, and that's Christian Helmers. So the guru heading back to Vegas as well.
Nice. Yeah, let's do it. Sounds like a lot of, it's great that Mark D'Amato, a rookie, or at least somewhat of an unknown in the contest scene, did so well on the first day. Then on the second day, with a lot of familiar names, a lot of familiar faces, especially if you mentioned Mike Bachok, Christian Helmers. These are names familiar to not just a lot of the horse players, but they've had success on TV with our own Matt Bernier. So these are some big names. These are some big names doing well up at Saratoga. Sounds like a fantastic contest. I missed it this year, but hopefully next year I might actually be able to make it up. Fingers crossed.
That'll be fantastic. You are going to be up here Alabama Day, which is rapidly approaching. A week from Saturday, we're going to be doing a seminar at Ciro's that day. This Saturday, which also happens to be Arlington Million Day, not coincidentally, we're going to have Steve Davidowitz, the author of Cashing Big on Racing's Biggest Days, in the tent, the Naira tent, in the grandstand, sort of down by the far turn. Going to be joined also by Travis Stone and Nick Tamaro. Going to have a lively conversation about how the meet has been going so far and get their thoughts on the day's card and also the goings-on at Arlington on Saturday. That should be fun. We're going to be talking about the Arlington races a little bit later in the show as well. I don't know who we're going to round out your panel with when you get up here, Mike, but it should be fun. We were talking about Steve Bick, but there's a possibility he's going to be out at the Pacific Classic. Going to have to see what his story is. A little bit more tournament news I just wanted to mention. Just announced mid-September, Woodbine are going to be doing a bigger buy-in live bankroll contest. It's going to be on Woodbine Mile Day, which I believe is the 18th. Look into it. It's $3,500 Canadian live bankroll. So I think that equates, if my math is right, to about $2,500 US. I think the rules and format are going to be pretty wide open, and it's something that live bank players should definitely think about putting on their calendar. I had so much fun there. I'm going to take Susan this time. We're going to go up. We're going to enjoy a couple days in Toronto and then hang around for the contest and schmooze with some of the top contest players. It should be fun. Have you ever been to Toronto, Mike?
I never have. I was in Montreal once when I was a kid. That's really the only time I've ever been to Canada.
Yeah, mentioning Montreal wants me to give a quick shout-out to a guy I met for the first time yesterday, Sylvan, who I know from Twitter, reached out, was looking to get a signed copy of the winning contest player. He came to see me and the crew up at the secret spot where we were hanging out, trying not to expire during the day. French-Canadian fella, and he's hardcore. He was going to the flat all day, and then he was heading over to the harness races at night, which we jokingly and with lots of irony like to refer to as the degenerate doubleheader. And I like the idea that a guy in his first day in Saratoga, he was sparing no time, wasting no time, getting right into the degenerate doubleheader. Thanks, Sylvan, for coming by to say hi and for all your support listening to the podcast. We really appreciate it. It's just so gratifying to have people come up to us and tell us that they like the work we're doing, offer constructive criticism, whatever it is. Do you get that? I mean, I imagine it's more of a Saratoga thing, Mike, because up here, obviously, where racing is in the sporting landscape is different than the city. But you've had a few stories like that as well, right? Of just sort of random people checking in with you about the pod and all the stuff going on that you do at DRF. Yeah.
Mark Danbaum, I met him waiting in line to get lunch he just heard us over, discussing racing, and he said, "Hey, are you Mike Hogan?" So every now and then, random things like that happen. Or I'm out at the track. I was on the way back from Stars and Stripes Day. I'm sitting on the train, and Ernie Munich gets on, sits right next to me. We ended up having a conversation. You just end up running into people. It's one of the things I love about horse racing, and it being the sport that it is. It's not like football. It's not like baseball even. It's not like basketball. It's not the kind of thing where everybody is a fan. So when you meet a fan, you automatically have this kinship and something to talk about. And I love it.
Being a racing fan is kind of like having a secret handshake, certain keywords. And, I think it's funny. Twitter has maybe made it a little different, because on Twitter, it's like so normal. And I think that allows some of the sort of negativity sometimes to like creep back into it. But I feel like when in the real world you meet a racing fan, you're doing nothing but bonding about being a racing fan. You're not like nitpicking somebody's specific opinion or anything like that. You monitor the Twitterverse much better than I do, Mike. Would you say there's a collegiality in certain corners of it, but how would you compare being a racing fan on Twitter to being a racing fan in real life?
Well, it's funny. I mean, in a way, I would compare it. The internet's kind of changed everything as far as that goes, for better and for worse. It's allowed people to communicate and find common interests a lot more easily. And I think back to when I was in high school in the late 80s and college in the early 90s, we didn't have the internet. I didn't know how to find music or other music fans, or if I liked this one band, I didn't know anybody else that liked them. Now you can easily connect with people. And so you almost take it for granted a little bit. Whereas if, 25 years ago, I would run into somebody that liked the same band that I did, we immediately have this bond. It's like this, like you said, like this secret handshake, and it's kind of the same with racing. Like if you're out in the wild, and I'm not talking like Kentucky because things are different there, but let's say you get on a plane at LaGuardia, and you sit down next to somebody who's a fan of racing, you got something to talk about for the whole flight. You've immediately made a friend. If you're both football fans, big deal. Everybody in the States is a football fan, but immediately you have this connection if you're a racing fan.
I think that's about right. All right, in a few minutes, we're going to bring in Marcus Hersh to talk about the races this weekend. But, Mike, today is also Hall of Fame Day here in Saratoga Springs. I'm not making it over there. There's just too much work to do. But I wanted to talk to you. I like the approach you took to an article that's currently up on DRF.com. People can read the article if they want all the specifics, but I wanted to talk to you about where you came up with this approach, tell people a little bit about it, and then I'll have a follow-up question for you after you describe what it is.
Well, there are a lot of really good articles on DRF.com about Rachel and Zenyatta going into the Hall of Fame. Jay Hovde wrote a fantastic piece, much, much, much better written than mine. Absolutely.
Jay Hovde's a better writer. He's a better writer than just about everybody, so don't feel bad about that.
Yeah, no, believe me, I don't feel bad at all. I'm just saying it's a fantastic piece, worth reading. My piece is really just looking back. It's been nearly 6 years since either of them have raced competitively. Of course, it's fittingly entering the Hall of Fame together on the same day. When they were racing, I mean, we had these two fantastic race mares who were among the greatest of all time, yet they never met each other on the racetrack. And there was obviously, this big debate, who's better? And you had some fans, Rachel would beat Zenyatta. Oh, no way, So I took a look back, and particularly, I think, had they not faced males, they might have been discussed as some of the, best fillies ever. I think what made both of them kind of great and go beyond really their own generation was when they stepped out of their own gender, when they stepped out of their own conditions and faced males. In the case of Rachel, a 3-year-old facing older males in the wood. That's really, from a historical standpoint, I think what stamped them as, slam dunk. They might have been first ballot Hall of Famers anyway, but as among the pantheon of greats.
Horses who became household names.
Yeah.
I mean, more or less. I mean, maybe that's a slight exaggeration, but they certainly, interest in them went beyond the normal boundaries of a great equine. And I agree, it is the performance against males at the very top level, beating the best, that made that piece of the puzzle occur.
Exactly. And so what I did was stepping back, and now that we've got a little history, time in between, all the horses that competed against them in those races have now since been retired. They're not currently running. I wanted to take a look at the fields of those races and just kind of bear out, like, okay, yeah, they beat males, but what were they beating? Almost that kind of joke. Oh yeah, but who'd they beat? So I went back and I took a look at all the past performances of everybody, and I didn't want to look at it like, look, Rachel beat Mind That Bird, who was a Grade 1 winner, of course, in the Kentucky Derby. I didn't want to look at it like that, like what came before, because I wanted to look at what they did after. I mean, Beholder beat Bayern, but Bayern was not really Bayern when Beholder beat Bayern. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I wanted never really Bayern.
Well, on his best day, if he had a little help, he'd be at the track or whatever else. He could beat the best there was. But
I loved him on Belmont Day, though. Yeah, that Woody Stevens he ran was really good. Whenever I make
fantastic
fun of him, I need to point that out.
Right, exactly. So my point was, sometimes you see, especially in some of these bigger graded stakes races, horses, you look at the form and you say, we've joked about Twilight Eclipse. He's in the twilight of his career. He's still running in graded stakes, but he's not the Twilight Eclipse from a few years ago. And so I wanted to look at, like, okay, did they validate the form of that race? What did they do afterwards? And so that was really the crux of the article. You can read it if you want. I went through long and short of it. And what I did was I looked at, it's 5 races total. The 5 races, 3 for Rachel against the boys and 2 for Zenyatta. And I looked at the horses that Zenyatta beat. Of course, Zenyatta lost to Blame, but she, in that race, ended up beating or finishing ahead of 10 others. So I looked at those, and then I looked at the others that she beat in the 11 that she beat in the 2009 Classic, and I looked at the 24 different horses that Rachel beat in the 3 races. She beat Papa Clem twice. And I just kind of ran the stats, how many graded stakes winners, how many grade 1 winners, that sort of thing. So
it's an interesting perspective for sure. I also, though, really liked, we always talk, Kinchin and I both, I make fun of him for being on the fence, but I'm just as on the fence when we talk about this, about how the specifics of when we're envisioning the race happening, what surface and what distance would affect who you would pick in the whole who's better debate. I thought your idea of how to match them up on as even terms as possible was really smart. So tell folks about the PPs you stuck in there.
Well, what I did, our internal system, you can do lifetime PPs, but it makes you do a theoretical stakes race. So you can't just say, give me the lifetime PPs of Zenyatta. You have to say, okay, it's at this track, at this distance. And so I looked at them and I said, look, they're both 2 for 2 at Oaklawn. They're both 6 for 6 at 9 furlongs. So I said, well, why not have them meet at Oaklawn 9 furlongs? It just so happens that is also, isn't that also the distance of, not quite the distance of the Apple Blossom. Well, it actually was the second year that Zenyatta won it. Yeah, the first year she won it, it was a mile and a 16th, but then the second year, 2010, it was elongated to 9 furlongs. So I just did it as a theoretical. What if they had run as their final race of their career? Oaklawn would have run the Apple Blossom sometime in April of 2011. So here you go. They're both 2 for 2 at the surface, 6 for 6 at the distance. Have at it.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
It's a fun thought experiment. Now, before we find Marcus and bring him in to talk about these public handicapper races, tell me about some of the reaction. People feel so strongly about this subject. What's been some of the reaction to the piece you've received?
They do. I think in my approach, too, was now that we've had some time to sit back and look at it, I hope people aren't like, bashing one at the expense of another, like to celebrate another. These are both fantastic mares, fantastic fillies that we should celebrate for the greatness that they achieved on their own terms. And there were a lot of the ones that would pick Rachel would criticize Zenyatta. Oh, she was, mostly synthetic, mostly Southern California. She didn't travel as much. But you have to think back. Her goal for the Mosses and John Sheriffs, it was in 2008 when she first got good. It was the Ladies Classic, the Breeders' Cup Ladies Classic. That was run on her home court in Santa Anita. They still sent her to Oaklawn for the Apple Blossom. They didn't need, if their goal is Breeders' Cup, they don't need to travel. Why do you leave your home court? Same thing for 2009. There's no reason to travel if your main goal is we want to win the Breeders' Cup. 2010, of course, they had to go to Churchill. I wish personally that they had given Zenyatta the prep in the Personal Ensign, which ended up being Rachel's last race of her career. It was a 10-furlong race. It was on dirt. It would have been a fantastic prep for the 10-furlong Classic, which was also on dirt at Churchill that year, and we would have had the chance to see the two of them on the track together. However, they decided to stay home. They prepped her in Southern California, and she nearly won it anyway.
Zenyatta would have won that race by about 8 lengths, if not more.
Yeah, right. And that's the thing. I mean, people that say, "Oh, she was a synthetic specialist."
Yeah.
No, look at her dirt races. Watch those dirt races. She was as good, at least, as she was on synthetic.
And I don't say this to denigrate Rachel. I maintain that despite the speed figures staying pretty similar in her 4-year-old year, that really, if you're in the Rachel camp, you wanted to see those horses. You want that 3-year-old. If it's Stratomatic and you're picking a year of it, in that case a team, in this case a horse, you're going with 3-year-old Rachel over 4-year-old Rachel. For me, every day of the week, and twice on Sunday.
Well, of course, but the 3-year-old Rachel is perhaps the greatest 3-year-old campaign that any filly has had in the history of racing. Yeah. So to say that she maybe regressed slightly in her 4-year-old campaign. Insult. Yeah. Right. She was still. I mean, look, she didn't finish out of the exacta in the disappointing 4-year-old year, and she still won impressively in a couple of her races. At her best, she was still the best. She might have even still been the best 4-year-old filly that year.
And now we're going to bring in. I always say this when he comes on, but it's true. Don't tell the other guests. One of my favorite guests that we ever bring into the podcast. And after this week, if he ever decides to go into handicapping contests, I think he'll have the glow from being a frequent guest as our, he might not even know this yet, but 2 of our other most frequent and favorite guests just ran 1-2 in the Saratoga contest. He is the Daily Racing Forum's correspondent for the Midwest. Nobody knows more about what's going on at Arlington than he does. He is Marcus Hersh. Marcus, how are you doing this morning?
As usual, Pete, you've made me blush. I mean, you start this off in such a way that I could never disagree with you or just talk down to you. You're just the best.
Maybe that's what it is. It's like an armor. If I'm really nice to the guests, I don't get that, acerbic wit, which is, half the reason I love you. So I maybe I'll have to come up with a more terse intro the next time.
No, you're doing fine.
So what is the mood like there on the eve of this Arlington Million card?
Well, I mean, wet. It's going to rain, and it's going to rain maybe a lot. It could rain up to 2 inches.
Whoa.
And that's enough to change the course conditions significantly. It hasn't rained in a while. It's been firm. They did water some on Wednesday, I want to say Wednesday. Which is, anyway, but the course was firm, not like, how the New York course has been getting super, super fast the last few years when it drives. Not quite that fast, but definitely it could take some rain, but not like 2 inches of rain. That's gonna change things significantly, and it's definitely gonna have an impact on the grass racing here. I mean, it's just this weather event is just actually starting, so it's hard to say exactly what's going to happen, but there's a tremendous amount of moisture in the air, and it's widespread rain. It's going to rain some, just a question of how much. And if you want to check, DRF and Twitter Saturday morning, I will hopefully get on the course and be able to give some more accurate information about just what it's like.
Terrific. Definitely follow along on DRF Live. Also, Marcus can be found on Twitter. Give us that Twitter handle again so I don't screw it up, Marcus.
I think it's DRF Hersh, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's DRF Hersh, and that's with an E. So, yeah, folks should definitely be following Marcus if they're not already. What is it about this day? Is it me, or has it rained the last 7 Arlington Million days?
No, it's rained a lot. I mean, when it's not raining, the horses are getting disqualified. I mean, it's like, I mean, I would like just for once, there just was like a straightforward race card to cover without any drama or. Yes, last year it rained like right before the Secretariat, and the horses were in the paddock. I believe it poured. Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, like with the Breeders' Cup, a lot of the European horses a lot of them are here because those trainers, their connections wanted fast, firm going, fast ground. So when you get a bunch of rain, it really foils their plan.
Yeah, I tweeted out yesterday, I think it was yesterday, Chad Brown, last 5 years, has had one horse finish first at Arlington, but he's got 3 wins. So.
That's exactly.
There's been a lot of chaos. It makes chaos and bad weather. That really makes a reporter's job fun. Should definitely be reading all of Marcus's stuff, both on DRF.com and, of course, in the print edition of the paper. Boy, you come up to Saratoga and you just see that print edition of the paper everywhere. It makes me feel better about these 48-hour deadlines that we have. I imagine this week it makes you a little crazy, though, Marcus. You keeping your head above water?
Now I am. I mean, yes, Thursday is always brutal. I thought I was in great shape because I started doing reporting for this, calling people and watching stuff, last Saturday even. But then, deadline comes and suddenly, it's 11 in the morning and you're like, oh boy. I've been doing this a long time, but it's still, deadlines are funny. It changes the landscape of the way you go about business. But what I did this week, Pete, really was I wanted to get a good look at these horses as much as possible, and the Europeans got in last weekend, and then the horses from the East Coast came in Tuesday, so they started training Wednesday, and so I got to see a lot of horses galloping in the morning, and just it's an inexact science, definitely, and when you don't see the horses all the time, it can be dangerous making judgments. For instance, I didn't like California Chrome at all in Dubai this year; he won easily, but I do think that it's worthwhile, and it was cool getting to see, what you look on paper and on little replays, getting to see some of these horses in the flesh up close and just how they're going about their business.
Well, let's dive in and talk about the Arlington races. There is a 4th public handicapper race this week, and it's the Fourstardave from Saratoga. If we have some time at the end, we'll do some quick thoughts on that. But really, I think folks are tuning in to hear about the big 3 stakes from Arlington. Marcus, also at the end, if we have time, maybe we'll let you give another spot play or 2 on the card. But let's start with the Grade 1 Secretariat. Marcus, as the guest, we're going to let you go first. What are you seeing and hearing, and who's your selection in this race?
My selection is watery, murky at best, because I think, to me, this is a tough race to really focus on a single horse. I think there are, there's only one easy throw out for me. Well, 2, because Scissors and Tape is in as a pacemaker for Oscar nominated, and I'm not a huge fan of either one of those horses. And I'm probably not going to use Oscar nominated either or as pacemaker, and I also don't think Corden has any chance. But to me, a win is in play for everybody else in the race. The horse I took on top was American Patriot, a horse who I didn't even really like that well and was against going into the Kent last time. I mean, he had showed a lot of progress over the winter and spring, and then he just threw a complete dodge in the American Turf at Churchill. But after, I think blinkers have made all the difference in the world for this horse. And then when I watched him here on Wednesday and Thursday, he seemed to travel really well, and his physical form looks like the form you see on paper, a horse who's really blossoming. He got to 1 1/8 with a good final furlong. He ran fast at the end of his last race, and I think that he'll get 1 1/4. He's a big, heavy, fullbacky horse, and I wonder how he would do if he's sinking into the ground a lot, if it's very soft. He's probably not as light on his feet as some of the other horses in the race, and that might be a concern. But barring the course condition, I gave him a pretty good chance at maybe a slightly better price than the two favorites, Long Island Sound and Beach Patrol, the horses that are both coming out of the Belmont Derby. Beach Patrol, I've seen all week too. He seems to be doing pretty well. I thought he ran a solid race, not spectacular in the Belmont Derby. The two in front of him I thought were significantly better than he was, but this is probably a little bit of a step down. I mean, the horse that won that race is going in the Million, not this race. And Long Island Sound at Belmont to me was farther behind a slow pace than might have been ideal, and I thought he finished decently. But I was looking for more. I thought he was a pretty progressive horse coming up the third to Hawksbill, who has went on to win a Group 1 in the Tercentenary at Ascot, and it was bet down to 5-2, and the Deauville was like twice the price. But he did travel well here. I was struck by how cool and collected he was his first day out on the track. Aidan O'Brien's horses tend to sweat a lot when they first get to Arlington, and this horse is a real exception to that. I mean, for whatever that's worth. And with only, he only just started racing this year, and with only five races, and his second trip here, this little easier competition, I probably favor him a little bit over Beach Patrol.
I was going to try to get out with those two. I did think that Beach Patrol maybe had the slightly harder trip. I agree with what you said about the pace of the race, but I did think he made a move into sort of a weird-looking middle move into maybe one of the quarters of that race that was a little bit faster, traveled 45 feet more than the winner that day. But I couldn't really separate them and was going to use them both. In terms of who's going to benefit if this comes up ridiculously wet, I would just sort of assume, I know what you're saying about maybe O'Brien specifically picking horses to send here who want firm, but I would just think on class and genetics, Long Island Sound might move up a little bit, at least relatively, or maybe that's not the right way to put it. Maybe he moves down less than some of the American horses.
That's right. He wouldn't mind it as much as how I would imagine it to be. And the Arlington Classic, from which the first two finishers come back for this race, Surgical Strike and One Mean Man, that was run on yielding course, and both of those horses handled all right. And Surgical Strike has had the trainers claimed this week that he's still maturing and he's actually doing great, and maybe even better than he was early in the year. He's had such an active campaign though, but he's a kind of a quirky horse, and the race has to be run to suit. He's been closer with blinkers on, but the pace has been really slow in his last two races too, and he might be better a little farther off the pace, making one run. I mean, he's not without a chance. I mean, if I'm trying to get by with the two favorites in this race, I'm going to be very nervous.
Yeah,
about skating through, because it could fall a lot of ways. I think.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Mike Hogan, we didn't leave a ton of meat left on the bone here for you, but what's your opinion in Secretariat?
Well, I liked Beach Patrol coming out of that last race. I was hoping to find a place where he might be not the favorite, because I saw everything you did, Pete. We actually talked about it on the podcast. He went wide both turns. He made a big middle move back stretch. He was tight near the wire. He still rallied. He went 45 feet further than the winner, 27 feet further than the horse that ran second. So I think he's an upgrade off of that. That said, I don't know if he's a slam dunk winner. I do think it's a wide open race. I would give One Mean Man a strong look, especially at the 12-1 morning line. Obviously likes the Arlington surface, does fine in the yielding course. And I really liked his race last out. I thought he was much better than Oscar nominated there.
I agree.
Wider. Yeah. So he's one from a, if you don't want to just use the top two, I prefer him to say Surgical Strike, who I've been chasing for a while. I had him at Churchill in the American Turf. I loved him at 15-1. I've loved him a number of times. I loved him in the Spiral. I thought he ran huge in there, but I think I'm kind of with you, Marcus. It's been a long campaign. He's a good horse, but I'm not sure he's going to improve, and he might need to improve in order to win.
All right, let's move it along to the Beverly D. I'll give my opinion very quickly here because I see this as maybe not the most complicated of races. But I'm also, if we had the sounder, we haven't made it yet, I'd play it a bit married to C. Khaleesi at this point. I was going to try to get away. I'm not saying I won't use some backup tickets, but I was going to make C. Khaleesi the lone A in this race. Mike, do you think I'm going to get away with it?
You might. I mean, she's the best filly in the race or mare in the race. As far as that goes, that said, they don't always win. And I tweeted out a stat about Chad Brown with favorites in turf routes outside, graded stakes outside of New York and Florida. He only wins. I mean, look, this is Chad Brown. He only wins about 1/5 of the time, and these are with favorites. There's a lot of noise. Yeah, I mean, Chad Brown, it's not like they don't run well, but as favorites, they're expected to win, and he only wins 20% of the time. He's out of the money 44% of the time, and sometimes that's with short-priced favorites. So, look, I don't know if it's enough to knock or say C. Khaleesi's not going to win, but it's enough to make me think you don't want to just single the favorite and move on, because it's a big field and there's some good horses in here. I would take a shot with some of the horses coming out of the Modesty. Be curious what Marcus's take on that was. One that interests me at a huge price is the Michael Stidham runner, Mary Pop. She did good things over in France. They brought her over probably with this race in mind. They got her race in the Modesty. She just kind of ran around chasing a pretty slow pace. They're adding blinkers here. If she improves at all and gets back to that European form, I don't see why she's not one of the players in here.
All right, Marcus, what are you seeing and knowing about the Beverly D?
Well, I think Mike hit the horse that's most interesting out of the Beverly D. Out of the Modesty, Mary Pop. Although, I thought Ophelia ran fine. I don't think she can win unless the favorite runs well below form. Mike, the Europeans would dispute your categorization of C. Khaleesi as the best horse in the race because they would say that Ballydoyle is the best horse in the race.
Sure.
She's the Group 1 winner. She beat the Great Minding, the best 3-year-old filly in Europe. Although, I don't know what that means exactly right now. I don't know that it's a vintage crop. We'll see. But she's the one with all the G1s next to her form, and she's been competitive. Granted, in the way I look at it, those are 2- and 3-year-old races, and she's tracking older horses. But the other thing is, she gets 6 pounds from C. Khaleesi, and the post 13 is pretty dreadful at 1 mile and 3/16 on the Arlington turf. Not as bad as at 1 1/4 mile like the Millions in the Secretariat, because the tree starts at the head of the stretch instead of right on the end of the far turn. But it's still it's not a good draw for her at all. She does have a pacemaker in the race, C. Khaleesi, and this other Martin Schwartz, Chad Brown horse, Elusive Million, who, if she does their job, will spread the field enough that C. Khaleesi can work out some sort of trip. Now, see, to me, I'm more in Pete's camp with this race. I am a C. Khaleesi believer. I thought she ran a great race in the New York, where she had all kinds of little issues in the stretch run, but she's all. I don't worry about the ground with her either. I think she's fine with some give in the ground. It's just a question of if she can get over and from post 13 and work out, pull some kind of trip, and is Ballydoyle going to rebound? If she is the filly that people thought she was at 2, and she did start out her 3-year-old year okay in the English 1000 Guineas, although she was very soundly beaten by Minding. If you believe in her and you're pulling the weight and you're getting the better draw, then she's a strong alternative to C. Khaleesi here. We are left completely in the dark about why she finished 13th as the favorite in the Belmont Oaks, a race in which she was 2-1 in a 13-horse field. I could not find anything online in researching what might have happened in attempts to contact Aidan O'Brien at Ballydoyle, the training facility, his yard in Ireland, not the horse, were unsuccessful. And the assistant who traveled here with the horse just said she broke poorly. She never got into the race. It happened. And that's not much of an explanation to me. I mean, people
at a short price against Older.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes you just draw a line through a race, but it's a very, very tough call for me. But I am leaning against her, and if I'm leaning against her, I'm not using her at all. I'm not, it's kind of all or nothing.
She's a B for me. I think it's, for me, it's a little bit of an Aidan O'Brien we trust situation. I loved her going into that race. Mike actually correctly predicted that Coolmore would run very well in that race. And I was saying, I don't think so. I think Coolmore's just Ballydoyle's rabbit, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, Coolmore ran very well. Ballydoyle, I mean, I can only describe it as a stinker. I can conjure an excuse for Long Island Sound based on the trip that you described, Marcus, and also a little bit of bumping, at least at the beginning. Sometimes that can knock the wind out of a horse a little bit, leading to a little bit more of a subpar effort. I don't know what the heck happened with Ballydoyle. Not an A for me. But I am going to use as a B.
And I still think she's inherently the better horse than Coolmore, even though they're positions. And I think she's going to be bet that way too. I think she'll be a shorter price than Coolmore, who did she just showed some pace off a slow gallop and ran evenly. She didn't finish very well at all in that race. I mean, you can't fault her finishing third, but I didn't think that she showed a lot. She's still a one other than eligible filly, who's. I'm not a Coolmore believer. She got very, very hot on her first day out. Not that means anything. The other filly, Ballydoyle, was a little bit iffy on her first day of training, and since she'd just been to New York, you'd think that she might have been a little bit more adaptable. But I'm not gonna completely fault her for that. It's just, I don't blame anyone for trying to beat T. Khaleesi with her, because that's the fine opinion to have. It's just not the opinion I have.
Mike, really quick before we move on to the Million, I'm just curious where you stand on the two Aidan fillies this time around, since when I got it so wrong last time, you got it so right.
Well, I did a little digging in Formulator on Aidan's runners in North America, and I looked with 3-year-olds. He does markedly better when they're running against 3-year-olds than when they're running against Older. He's had 2 wins in the Breeders' Cup, most recently, of course, Found beating Older last year. He is 0 for 9 in races that are not Breeders' Cup races, running 3-year-olds against Older. He's something like 7 for 9. It's a little arbitrary,
though, isn't it? But not.
But
Breeders'
listen,
Cup races?
I think that's part of the, part of it is it's later in the year to face Older.
Okay, fair.
And part of it is many times he'll use these Arlington races or some of these other races as preps for the Breeders' Cup. But when he faces 3-year-olds against their own, 7 for 19, much more success.
You had me doubtful, but you won me over.
Never won the Beverly D. He's won the Secretariat 3 out of the last 5 years, but Aidan O'Brien's never won the Beverly D, for whatever that's worth too.
It's interesting. It's interesting stuff. All right, we're running out of time here. Let's move it on to the Million, and we'll start with Marcus this time. Your thoughts?
Very weird race. All the favorites are drawn on the far outside. I thought that was significant enough. I led my race preview with it for DRF.com and DRF print, because I did just a touch of post position research, and it's kind of really bad out there. Tristar in 12 and Deauville in 13 are up against some pretty strong historical trends, and is Tristar enough better than the other horses that he can overcome a wide draw and ground that might not be his best? I don't think that it's going to be like European soft, but it's going to, he has done his best work on fast ground, and he's almost certainly not going to get that. He does get LASIK. 7-2 morning line favorite. I think the line maker has this race close to right. I can't really even say who's going to be favored. I think there's going to be a cluster of higher price, like high, low-priced horses with Tristar and World Approval, Deauville, and Wake Forest. Wake Forest is a horse I'm against in this race. Just I don't think that he's quite good enough, and I did not like the way he looked in the morning for whatever that's worth. And Deauville, I don't think he gets some weight. He gets 6 pounds, but I don't think that he's off his Belmont Derby, I don't think he's good enough to beat the best older horses in this race from post 13, even getting a break in the weight. World Approval, I have concerns about how many strong races he has run in a row, and then to be frank, in the 2 days I saw him training, he just looked listless. He had almost no energy. If you try to do some sort of exercise and you're just not feeling it, and every step seems like an effort, that's how he looked trying to gallop. I mean, maybe that's just him, but I wasn't enthused. So anyway, Mondi Elise was my top pick to win the race. The horse who is already proven in United States racing with 2 very good races last year, who is not ground dependent. I think he handles a variety of surfaces because it was good to firm last out in the York Stakes, where he ran an excellent race behind a high-class horse in time test when stretched to 1 mile and 5/16, longer than his races. That race to me it showed that he's back from his dreadful form trough after a really good race in the Breeders' Cup. He ran 3 total stinkers. I think that this is a kind of a sharper 1.25 miles that he'll be able to get. I think he's got a good chance to win the race. I don't know that he's going to be 8-1, but I think that he might be playable on.
I can go real quick and just second that emotion. Incredible run behind Tepin in the Breeders' Cup Mile, quickened up really, really nicely late in that race. Was expecting big things, but I agree the last race seems to signal a return to form. I'm going to be using plenty of Decorated Knight on my tickets as well. Some good information from my sectional guru over in the UK, one of the top 10 pro punters in the UK today. Rob Dove makes his own sectional numbers off of video editing software when they're not commercially available, and he had some good dope on the sectional times. Decorated Knight has been running. I can't let Tristar beat me, but I'm not excited about betting him, so I'm going to probably get stuck into the other 2. What do you think that's a sensible approach, Marcus?
Well, the only thing I would say is Decorated Knight. I talked to the trainer, Roger Charlton, who's a tremendous horseman. And the horse was here because he wants fast ground.
Gotcha.
I mean, he specifically said, I hope it doesn't rain. Okay,
wow,
so
great
rain.
info. All right, I might slow my roll a little bit on that one then. But for me, you get information like that. I think it's totally cool to downshift your opinion. I can't throw out though.
No. And also, I mean, I was really interested in this horse because he's the kind of, castaway horse that the Europeans say, oh, he's not good enough, and he gets ignored, like kind of a Debussy type who won the Million at a big price. And I was interested in him coming over. And interestingly, the first day I saw him on Sunday, I thought he looked pretty good. To me, he looked progressively worse throughout this week in the morning. And they did a little turf work with him on Thursday morning. They said just to familiarize him with the bend, though he went quick enough to get a time to make the work happen. And I mean, obviously they weren't looking for a lot, but still, the horses make an impression, whatever they're doing, just how they go about their business. And I have not been impressed with him at all since the first day he was here.
This is the kind of great info we love having Marcus on the show for. Amazing stuff. And, obviously you're going to get the same information in pieces he writes, but when you're doing it more journalistically, there's a little more code. You come on a show like this where it's so informal, you can really get the straight dope. Just want to thank you again, Marcus, for coming on, providing that info.
Oh, that's no problem.
No, we'll see.
While I'm still rambling on, let me tell you the horse that looked best that I've seen, and this is a horse I didn't like at all on paper, really, was Take the Stand. Who hasn't run in forever, and he's had some interrupted preparation, but he definitely has the look of a fit horse, and I've not seen a horse that's been better galloping this week than him. He's also the likely leader and likes to control the pace. 2 issues are the 1.25 miles and a softer course. I don't know how either one of those will affect his chances. Probably not positively, but he's a horse that I would take a look at a price.
I like it. Mike Hogan, what are your thoughts on the Arlington Million?
I think we're going to make it 3 for 3 with Mondi Elise. He's the one that I think, I know, too much weight. We're going to drag it all down together.
It's not so much that, but it's just like, what's his price going to be, Mike?
Right.
What do you think? Do you think he'll be half those odds? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I think probably 9-2, more realistic than 8-1. I mean, for all the reasons that you guys mentioned. He's coming off of an improved race. Last out time test is a good one overseas. He's got American form. People are going to see Tepin twice in his PPs. He's of the Europeans, he's the one that many of the Americans would probably know the best. And I don't know if that means he's going to be favored among all of them, but I don't think you're going to get the 8-1.
All right, let's move it into the speed round here, because there are two other things I want to do. One is to very quickly talk about the Fourstardave at Saratoga, but before we leave Chicago, and I didn't clear this question with Marcus, so maybe there's no answer, but with the uncertain weather conditions. But Marcus, do you have a spot play anywhere on the card that interests you?
My best bet is in race 3, a horse trained by, future Hall of Famer, everybody knows him, Pavel Vaschenko.
Oh yeah, Pavel.
One of Mike Hogan's favorites.
That would be
sure, yeah.
That would be Cartoon, who on yielding ground, he's won on yielding, and he was second last out to a horse named K-Mac, who's in great form, and came back and won like a high-end allowance race against better horses than this horse runs against. And the horse that was third in that race, Revolt, ran back at the same level at Canterbury and won easily. And Cartoon has a right to improve off that last race. And I think, you got Carlos Montalvo riding, you got Pavel Vaschenko training, you've got a big on-track crowd who's betting, names. That's when you can get a little bit of an overlay on a horse like this.
Seems like a very sharp approach. I'll pass along that Rob Dove tipped me to the idea of taking a long look at Clondall Warrior in the marathon based on the form from the Galway Plate last time.
Oh yeah,
that's one I'll mention.
He's got a great chance. I mean, I think he's the biggest danger to the favorite, to Big Hoss, in that race for sure.
Excellent, Mike Hogan. Why don't you kick us off with your thoughts on the Fourstardave at Saratoga?
Well, the Fourstardave is a race where I like it because I don't really like the favorites. I think they all have some knocks against them. Tourist is probably a somewhat legit 5-2 favorite in a Grade 1 at Saratoga, and he's never won a graded stakes. He's coming off of a 5-race losing streak. That said, on his best, he's good enough to win, and he's coming off a huge effort last out in the Shoemaker Mile that was validated when Midnight Storm came back to win impressively as well. He can win, but I don't love him. I don't see why he can't lose either. So, and another thing I've mentioned on the podcast a number of times about how Todd Pletcher does on turf in Grade 1s. It's not good. Bill Mott in the last 5 years. Celestine won recently, but that's only the 4th winner he's had in the last 5 years in a turf Grade 1. He's like 4 for 65 or something like that, with a lot of short-priced favorites disappointing. So, he's logical, but I'm willing to take a shot against Tourist. The second choice Ring Weekend, this will be his second race in, 15 months or so, 18 months. His third race in 24 months. I don't know. I don't want him. He's got 2 4-week gaps in his work tab since the last race. Graham Motion is a fantastic trainer. I think if anybody can get him ready, it's him. But at a short price, he's another I'd take a stand against. I like Force the Pass, who I think was really up against it last out in the Forbidden Apple. Still ran huge to almost win, running down a loose King Creasa, who set the pace and is going to have a little bit more company in here. Force the Pass since the last race had a huge 58-1. This is we don't have clockers out at Colt Neck Stables training facility, but 58-1 is nothing like any works I've seen from Force the Pass before. It shows that he's just seemingly bouncing around in his stall, ready for this one. I would be surprised if he doesn't run big. My long shot play in here is Reporting Star, who's going to be a huge price. I think he can run back to some of his better form earlier in the year.
All right. Now, didn't do the 100% job on the work. My eyes were immediately drawn to Force the Pass for whatever that's worth. Marcus, with everything you've had going on, you can't possibly have had time to handicap this race, but you know these horses. Is there a way you're leaning in the Fourstardave?
Well, everybody's dying to see the rematch from the 2014 Sir Cat between Tourist and Ring Weekend. That's the biggest takeaway. Force the Pass is an interesting horse. I mean, I agree with a lot of what Mike said, and the best thing about it is that this horse has not come right this year. He was struggling. The trainer wasn't happy with the way he was going earlier in the year, and they've been dodging soft ground. What's the weather like up there? What's the turf condition going to be this weekend?
It's going to be
he
soft.
Doesn't want.
It's going to be soft. That's a great point. I wasn't even thinking
issue.
of that. Yep, because they scratched on.
That's an issue for him. Yeah.
I mean, I say it's going to be soft. It feels like it's going to be soft. You never know up here.
It's at least what it's been like down here, and I don't know if it's similar up there, is it's so oppressively muggy and humid, and it'll be fine and sunny for a while, and then you just have this huge storm come through and dump a lot of rain, and then it'll pass. And so there will be rainstorms.
We haven't had that rain yet.
If it's wet, then Takeover Target definitely moves up. I mean, he was supposed to be entered in the Million, or he was mentioned a lot for Brown, but then he said, okay, I'm going to stick him in there, but he'll only run if it rains. And you can see that on his form too. He'll be much better if there's cut in the ground, and he's a horse that moves up. I mean, and then you got to figure out what to do with Grand Arch, who I thought. Okay, the question with him is, he's 7. He had a huge year last year at 6, and he was slow to come back this year. I actually talked to the trainer, Brian Lynch, because I was covering the Breeders' Cup Mile, and I think I did some follow-up, and he said, I would like to get him going earlier in 2016 than in 2015, and have him really ready to roll for Keeneland and Church. So then he doesn't even show up until the Dixie. But then he ran a really good race in that race, but then it just was awful in the poker.
Right.
He's a defending champion in this race, and he handles a variety of turf conditions.
One of Mike Hogan's favorites.
I don't know what his price is going to be. Yeah. He's got bounce back potential to me. I think Taurus is a solid horse. I would absolutely I would not consider playing him at like 5-2 in this race. There's just no way.
Where are you with Grand Arch here, Mike Hogan?
He's a head scratcher. I mean, look, you can forgive that last race a little bit. He was trying to run down, obviously, who was loose on the lead and getting weight from the whole field. So that was not happening.
In a one-turn mile at Belmont, which is probably not really his game.
Right, exactly. He's back to a 2-turn race, which I think is better for him, which is part of why I liked him over King Creesa last year. I think he prefers the 2-turn races. I loved him in this race last year. If he's able to get back to that form, maybe. The question I have, and I kind of jokingly tweeted this out, but I wonder if there's something to it. I mean, do you have to downgrade him a little bit after that performance Brooklyn Bobby put in? I mean, they're working together. That was partly why Brooklyn Bobby was getting bet, but.
The barn is not in good form. There's no question about it. I mean, Brian Lynch generally does a good job, but I mean, he's not having a good meet, and they were cold at Belmont too, I believe, when the assistant had to take over because of synthetic marijuana gate.
Right. Oh boy, that was so.
Right.
Well, we won't get into that, but I don't think so, Mike. Just because Brooklyn Bobby, 2-year-old breaking on the inside, never really figured out what was going on. It's not like the reports where Brooklyn Bobby worked so much better than Grand Arch. I think it was more just they were working together. I think there's too many positives for Grand Arch to throw in based on that information. I mean, I guess you said you were kind of joking, but I'm just giving my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't really change. If you like him, there's no reason to get off of him because of that, but I just thought it was kind of funny.
That is all the time we have for this week's edition of the DRF Players Podcast. I want to thank Marcus for joining us. I want to thank Mike Hogan as always. I want to thank Muggs, the barking Labrador, for making several appearances throughout the show. It was a lot of fun. Most of all, I want to thank all of you. Big weekend of racing coming up. Lots of uncertainty with the weather. But once we figure out what conditions are going to be, we can dive in and make our final selections. No matter what happens with the weather, I hope you win all your photos. 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 You win all your photos.